Ultra.
Goes huge for Ultra, and they get their first home series victory.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of CA Ultra. I'm one of your hosts, Spencer. With me is Chris. And Chris, how's it going?
It could be going a little bit better.
Could be going a lot better.
Could be going a lot better. That's right. We have a little bit of a somber episode. Not all hope is lost, though. But before we take off with things and give you a brief synopsis and preview of the next week, the first major, which I'm excited for nonetheless, please remember, if you do like this content, make sure to smash that subscribe button as hard as you smash your keyboard when your mom says it's time to stop playing video games.
That's so weird. Okay, yeah, with that, I agree. And in the comment section below, let us know what you think of the Toronto Ultra. One, what the performance was this week, but two, is this a team that you think needs to make some changes? Because that's sort of the overarching question on our minds today is going to be, should the Toronto Ultra go out there and sign an additional player, or do changes need to be made with this lineup? Because as you guys know, if you're a Toronto Ultra fan, this was a very, very disappointing week. A very, very disappointing Super Week for the Ultra. I think going in, we had a lot of high expectations. We were talking about the potential of them beating Optic, right? This week started off, I think, with me and you saying that there was a real chance this team could upset and take one of those matches versus FaZe or Optic and sort of finish as the cleared third team in this league, or in this division, sorry. And instead it was to be frank, the exact opposite, where not only did they lose to Atlanta, FaZe, and Optic, and they played some maps close, but they were also blown out in other maps, but also they then played two of the weaker teams in the division in LAG and Paris. And again, what I was hoping to see, a dominant 3-0 performance, what I instead got was back-to-back 3-2 losses, where the team sort of looked good at points, but at other points really, I think, choked and threw some of those maps away.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the hard things with this is that, I always look at trends to see where maybe, Toronto Ultra can improve. And it's crazy because, for the first two matches, we had a clear trend where, we were really not doing good at control. We're close on those hard points and then doing killer in S&D.
Yeah.
And then during the last two games, that kind of flipped
Some ways
into okay, we did good on control, but then we're just getting destroyed in S&D. Like the LA Grills game where we lost 6-1 twice. Obviously, at that point they're completely mentally booned, not doing too great. But it's just crazy that they went from being this really good S&D team that was decent at hard points and really strong at control to having some bright spots in control, but also just getting destroyed in S&D.
Yeah, and it was it really started with that Paris game, I feel like, because you're right. If you looked at that first Paris S&D as well, right? They go out there and they win 6-0 with the Methods gets his ace, and I was like, yeah, this is a really good control team. This team is feeling themselves, and they kind of go into that then they take that momentum and they actually win the control 3-0, and I was like, wow, a 6-0 S&D, a 3-0 control, and a really close first hard point that even though they lost, they were very competitive in. And then they go up in that third hard point to close out that game 3-1 Toronto Ultra. And they're up 200, 210 to 120, 130. I forget the exact scoreline. But they were up 80, 90 points. And I was like, oh man, are they really going to do a really close, 250, 225 hard point and then go 6-0, 3-0, and then 250, 130? That is going to be a dominant performance by this Toronto Ultra team. What a bounce back after a first map loss. And I think the narrative surrounding this team would have changed completely. But instead, what we saw was sort of a collapse where the team loses 3 hard point rotations in a row and, really obviously allows Paris not only to climb themselves back in that map, but back into the series. Paris ends up winning that, even though they're up 210 to, 130. And then they go into the S&D, which you're right, was sort of their safe space, if you will. Sort of that position where you're like, okay, at least they're going to win their S&Ds, and then they lose that one 6-3 after dominating them the first time. They then go into the LAG game. They actually win both of their hard points, although both of those hard points were very close, right? They did take both of them, but that first one was 250, 242. That's that final one. If Memphis doesn't start out 11-0, 12-0, I don't know if it necessarily goes in their favor. They still almost, again, threw some rotations away, and that one could have went the other way as well. But again, for LAG, they lose both of their search and destroys. Control continues to be an issue for this team, even though they did get that win versus Paris. And, what almost went from, again, if they had beaten Paris in that hard point and could have potentially carried that momentum into the LAG game and won that like another 3-1 or, whatever, the narrative of starting this team is completely different. They're probably starting in the winners bracket. They're the conversation for a top 5, top 6 team in the game. But instead, they're now, fighting to not get, knocked out in the first elimination round and be one of the bottom 2 teams in the league. Like, it's crazy, like, how throwing away a few hard point rotations can really change the dynamic of things. But yeah, it was a tough weekend, to say the least. It was tough.
Yeah, it was extremely tough. And I think one, big trend that happened as the week went on is the mental game, I think, decreased. I think, I don't know if you guys saw.
It's tough to say that because, but yeah, sorry, continue.
I mean, after your third loss where you lose like a game you should have won against Paris, did you see their faces?
Yeah.
After that loss?
Yeah.
It was incredible. They were literally stone cold, just like they're at a funeral.
Yeah.
Like, you could tell that their mental is going down. And then another topic I think you can expand on too, Spencer, is the fact that they're playing extremely individualistically from my standpoint.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know, like it's tough because you're right. These are like some of the issues that I think we had seen, when the roster was first constructed. I think that's like the main point that concerns me a little bit is it's not like these are issues that are kind of coming out of nowhere and you're like, oh, like, don't worry, they'll figure it out, they'll bounce back. Like when Dallas sort of started the year struggling a little bit, right? You're like, okay, they'll figure it out. It's not a big deal. But I think a lot of people, like, you go back to our episode where we previewed the team and we had Potsy on the show, who, again, is one of the coaches for, one of the best tier 2 teams in Europe at the time, right now, sorry. And, we sort of said the same thing where it was, this team sort of has, between Bance and Cammy, they don't really have that clear-cut second SMG player, right? They sort of have 2 players who kind of prefer to play with an AR in their hand, 2 players who kind of prefer to play that flex style of role. And when I watch this team play, maybe they do lack a little bit of leadership, which is another concern that we had. And I think that, again, goes to show why they're throwing some of these leads away. But also, I think they lack map pressure a lot of the times. So if you look at Cammy, you look at the Bance, you look at the way they're playing, and they're both pretty consistently sort of slower players and always like on the map looking for kills. You've seen this a few times throughout the games. There's like one instance where, like, again, like Kleenex is watching the window in raid, and Cammy runs over and instead of watching mid, also looks at the window to try to get some picks, and then someone flanks and gets both of them from behind. Like, these are just some mistakes that you see throughout their like gameplay. And it's not that like Cammy or Bance are playing poorly individually. Like, I don't think anybody on this team individually is playing poorly. It's just the fact that I think, like, as a team, they lack map pressure because the only person who can really give it is Kleenex. And that's when Kleenex is putting like 1.35s and he's, entering first and getting a pick and putting damage on the second person. The team looks really good because they're getting that map pressure. But if he's not kind of like single-handedly, taking on that role, I think the team struggles because nobody else can really pick up like that aggressive slack. And I think it shows.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think in the games where we lost pretty convincingly and weren't doing well, where the games are, to be honest, Kleenex was underperforming. He was underperforming compared to the games that we played against Atlanta and Optic, and the games we played the week before, 2 weeks before as well.
But I want to make it clear though, it's fine. It's not fine if Kleenex underperforms, but when you play a role like Kleenex, that's the kind of role where you can't just look at KD, in my opinion, right? It's not like Kleenex's only job. It's like get kills. Like when you're the first person in, sometimes you're just not going to win those gunfights. Like when you're entering into like FaZe or Optic, right, and somebody's holding that angle, like you're just going to get picked. And if you can go in there and put some damage in and get that trade, and the person coming in after you gets that pick and gets the info and potentially can, get a second one, then I think you're doing your job, and that's okay. That's why I don't just like to look at KD. But what concerns me more is like, you can even look at instances where like you look at Crossroads, right? Like it's easy to look at that Crossroads game versus LAG and be like, well, like what do you mean? Like Bance wasn't playing. He had 40 and 30, like that's 70 engagements. Clearly he's playing fast. Clearly he's frying. He's doing well, and I think he was doing well on that map. But like, it's also important to look that, like, while he does have 70 engagement and 40 kills, Kleenex has 4 less engagements, 4 less kills, but 800 more damage. Right? Cammy has, I think, only 32 kills. I think he has like 8 less engagements, but even he has like 200 more damage than Bance. It's like, how do you have 8 less kills, 9 less engagements, but 150 more damage? Like, what that kind of says to me is like, Bance, again, is the second guy in, the third guy in, kind of like cleaning up those kills, as opposed to the one who's like being aggressive and making stuff happen. And I think that like that at this point is sort of what that team lacks. And it's not a knocking its Bance because like Cammy could also be doing it, but Cammy again is also playing a slower individualistic playstyle. I think it's the fact that we have two players who want to play one role and like they both can't really flex over to that like again aggressive sort of submachine gun playstyle, which was like what we wanted them to pick up in the offseason to sort of have that look. So I don't know. You're right. When Kleenex is underperforming, it hurt. Like you can see the team like locks that map pressure.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think it's a little bit too early to be like, we need to switch up the roster majorly. Like it's something that we need to consider. I think just
I agree.
From these past couple of weeks, I think now we're like, okay, I need to change my expectations. I had certain expectations for the team that I don't think are going to be fulfilled. And I'm going to be disappointed if I don't change them. So I'm changing them now. But I think the majors is a really good opportunity for them to kind of reestablish themselves and kind of give us hope back. So I think it's an extremely important week that they have ahead of them. So Spencer, for you, what would be like an outcome that you'd be happy with in the majors, and what's like a crash and burn outcome?
Well, I mean, that's the problem. Like, here's what I'm saying. Like, you're saying that we need to readjust expectations. Like, I feel like this roster's got some good pieces where, like, what do you mean by readjust expectations? Like, are they now, like, the 8th best team in the league, the 9th best team in the league? Like, if you're starting to readjust your expectations that low, I do think changes have to be made. But I do agree. I want to make it. Like, we're being negative because, like, I don't know, after that week, I don't know how you can really come away super, super positive. I'm not saying to, like, blow up the entire roster. It was, like, again, basically 1 week because of the way, like, the circumstances in Dallas. It was 4 games. They had like 4 games in 6 days. They didn't get a ton of chance to like review the VODs, practice, mentally reset, and bounce back. So I totally agree that this major is going to be very, very important for these 4. Like I don't expect any changes to happen obviously before the majors. But to answer your question in terms of like what should like a realistic expectation be that I think they'd be happy with, they need to go in there and they need to beat. I mean, London's a given, and even with how down maybe we both are on this team after that week, I don't think either of us expect them to lose in London. I think they should win that game pretty convincingly. Obviously, if they lose to London, there's some problems, right? Like we're running out of time. Even though it's only the first major, I think there's only like 5 total. So you kind of got to make the most out of these opportunities. But I expect them to beat London. But if they only win London and they get knocked out by Roker, like even though Roker's a good team, and I can understand the argument, but that's still really not a position that you want to be in for a team that I know for a fact had like top 5, top 6 aspirations at the beginning, going into the season. So if they're able to beat Rocker and then go in there and beat LAG and they go on this run, then I think that we can re-establish them as that sort of top 16 that I think that we thought they were. But if they get knocked out in that second round, like I don't know, it would be tough, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And just to talk about my expectations at the start of the season where they're roughly 6 in most power rankings, I think they could break that like top 5 placement. Now it's more like they're like a hard 6, maybe 7. Yeah. So that's how I've been readjusting my own expectations.
It's tough because it's so early, right? We haven't seen like enough games. We don't have like a large enough sample size to really gauge this. Like this is the same, but that's the other problem. It's the same team that last year that started off doing the exact same thing, right? You lose 2 map 5s. Like even if these teams had won both these map 5s, the conversation is different. It was the same at the beginning of the last year, right? Where they were a team that always lost map 5s, and then finally at the end of the year, Kleenex comes in, they start winning the map 5s, and all of a sudden they're like a top 6 team, right? It's just like, man, it's the fact that like I think there's styles that I'm seeing, like there's like errors that are glaring, and I don't know if they're going to be able to fix them with the 4 they have. That's why I'm a little bit more concerned. But yeah, hey, it's in their court, right? If this team wants to go out there and fry, and if they can, because I think if they beat Minnesota, right, the next thing they play is the loser of LA Thieves and LA Gorillas.
Yeah,
dude, there's a very real possibility that this team beats London, beats Minnesota, and then beats LA Gorillas, and they finish again in the top 6 in this tournament. And then once again, next week, we're having, the same way that we're like readjusting it in a negative perspective this week, we then might have to readjust it in a positive perspective after this major is done. So by all means, like, no, I think immediate changes are necessary because it could just be an off week. Like people have off weeks, and it was 4 games in 6 days. So maybe this was their off week. Like we will see. But yeah, this team goes out there and they like play a close map versus London, and then Minnesota beats them. That's when I think you might start to see some changes.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. You hit the nail on the head. Yeah, right. We're always readjusting expectations, right? So when we made one big adjustment after this week, we can make an adjustment to make it better after the second week.
Sorry, and just to clarify this last point, because some people might be like, it's too early, it's still too early. But the issue is, I don't think they're the only team that's going to look to like, reevaluate their team and make some changes. And if you are a team like Ultra, and like the first one that jumps to mind, obviously, is putting Insight in over Methods. Insight just won the Challengers Cup, which is a great achievement for him. But even that in itself, like, could that improve the leadership? Sure. And would that help the team? Maybe. Because I do think when you throw a game like Paris, that could fall in leadership. But I also don't think that like the map pressure falls on Methods. So if you are a team that like maybe you want to go out there if you're an Ultra and again sign the 6th player, a fast SMG to maybe provide more map pressure, there's only a few people left. I think that could like immediately walk in and make an impact. And if you're the Ultra and you're like, oh, we'll wait another major, and you do well in the second major, you're like, oh, maybe wait till the third one. But then at that point, maybe the people who you would have wanted to have signed are already gone. You saw this with Afro. Afro would have fit this team perfectly. They waited too long. He went to London. So I do think that there might be a few teams looking for that additional player. So if you're Ultra, you need to start scouting now, especially if you do think that map pressure could be an issue moving forward. That's the only reason why I'm seeing this like sense of urgency. Urgency is because I'm worried that another team might jump on and sign one of the remaining few top tier free agents like a Venom, for instance, or a Standy if you're willing to pay that sort of buyout fee. And then I think Ultra's in like a tougher position. So, but with that being said,
yeah, I agree with that.
Hey, they can win this. They can go on and run this tournament. Absolutely, they can go on and run this tournament and change both of our expectations. And the team's good enough to do it. We've seen them reach those highs. They just need to prove upon the consistency.
I agree with that. I agree with that too, Spencer. I think that's good closeout statement. We're going to be back with another episode of CA Ultra next week to give you good coverage on how those majors went. And I'm hoping we'll be happier next time. So, hey, once again, if you guys like our content, please smash that subscribe button by smashing your mouse as hard as possible. And let us know if you agree or disagree with us in the comment section.
Yeah. Closing thought, Chris. Closing thought before we go. Who wins the major?
Who wins the major?
Yeah, who do you think's going to take it?
Honestly, Atlanta FaZe. They haven't showed a crack yet.
No, I agree. I mean, my number one team going in. You don't think Dallas Field's going to bounce back? They look good versus Thieves? You don't think so?
Dallas Field, did he just say?
Oh, I said Dallas Empire. God! Whatever, man. I do too many podcasts here, whatever. Overwatch, Call of Duty, they're all the same to me. This blurs together.
Yeah.
I think Atlanta FaZe too, but Dallas Empire, you can never count the champs out. So I'm excited to see that.
Exactly.
But again, thank you guys for watching. And as always, enjoy.